Okay, so this is very fun. We are starting a weekly conversation, continuing our regular conversations. I'm Larry Stein, Stein On Stuttering, and we've got Cookie Green, who is the best on the internet, best on Facebook, with her From Stuttering to Confidence group. And it's just a pleasure. Cookie, how are you doing today?
I am doing wonderful. And one thing I actually like is our conversations that me and you do. So I thought it was a good idea to let's just tape some of these, let's just tape some of it. And what I want to do is ask questions to you, and I just want to kind of pick your brain, and we'll just talk about it. So my first question to you is, now you say that you stuttered a lot when you were younger. I want to know, what was the breaking point? What was the point where, or what was the thing that made you come out of that stutter and go into a more way of speaking? I want to hear your story.
Okay, it's a long question, long answer, but I'll try and keep it brief. So there wasn't just one thing. Mine was a very long journey. I stuttered for about 50 years, pretty heavily. In my early years, when up till about 30, it was pretty severe. It was pretty severe. I wasn't even able to read in a room by myself without stuttering heavily. I couldn't talk to myself out loud without stuttering heavily. I wasn't able to say my name until at the age of 57. And that took me several months of working on that. So at the age of 55, when, it sounds late, when I was 55, I had opened up my own business finally, because I had compromised my career for decades. I always wanted to be in the investment field, and I didn't think I could talk well enough. And then a couple of times I tried, I just couldn't get out a word. So at the age of 55, I'd been in business 1 year, which I loved, my own business. And I realized I just hardly had any clients. I had to get more clients. So I felt I had to improve my speech, because while I was able to do small talk by then, because my speech really improved while I was, working at companies. And that kind of got me talking in more situations. So whereas, some people who stutter say, I'm just going to focus on my speech and take off some time from work. Work to me was one of the greatest things, because it got me talking. As much as I resisted and avoided talking, it got me talking and put me in situations where I had to start talking. But at the age of 55, I was still not able to ask the hard questions that you have to do to get new clients. I couldn't say my name. I couldn't introduce myself. I couldn't make phone calls to strangers. I couldn't do all those things beyond, having a nice conversation that I could do. Having a small talk, I could do that real well. But beyond that, that was really hard for me. So I had about 5 years before that, maybe a few years before that, I had a cousin who worked at a small nonprofit, and they had a bunch of old directors, and they asked me, would I join the board? And no one ever asked me to do anything, and I said, sure, wow, what a great thing. And so I joined this board, very small, don't be impressed. And a few years later, they asked me to be the president. Again, everyone is very old, and the only other person who wanted to do it was 85 years old, and they asked me, and of course I said, what did I say, Cookie? Did I say yes or no?
You went, I'm all in.
No, I said no, of course, because I had I had, led meetings by this time at work with a few people, but I was always substituting words, trying to get around without stuttering, and I would have to give little speeches, 5 to 10 minute speeches. And the last time I had done a speech, it was a 10-minute speech that took 28 minutes. So I said no, and they kept on asking me, and I kept on saying no. And finally, maybe a third or fourth time, I said, okay. And that was a big turning point for me. Not that I said, okay, but a year later or two, probably a year later, I'm leaving a board meeting. I'm regretting taking this position because, nothing's getting done. And I'm about to walk out the door into a really snowy night. And I realized the first aha moment of many, many, many aha moments. And that is, I realized that I public speak better than when I talk. And I made the decision in 10 seconds, why don't I just public speak all the time? Public speaking then for me was simply phrasing. Because when I was leading board meetings or when I was speaking, these very brief little speeches, I would speak in phrases, which I learned way back in speech therapy at Northwestern and at University of Chicago when I was a kid. So I would speak in phrases. I said, why don't I just public speak all the time? That was my first big moment. I was 55, and I just said from that moment, I'm going to speak phrase to phrase to phrase. I'm just, words don't matter, I'm just speaking in phrases. And that was the start. And I made a little bit of improvement, a little bit. And then I began to get very into this because I made for the first time in my life, I felt I was making some progress, some little progress. And I began watching broadcasters, most particularly Matt Lauer, who's now been, he's come on rough times, deservedly, but I began mimicking him. I mimicked his hand motions. I mimicked how he paused. I mimicked how he would emphasize words. And I began adding this to my repertoire. And so I would picture him speaking my words and me speaking his words. It was just like, I would just watch him so intently. And I began to model myself after him. And that was how I came up with, largely, not all the time, but we don't have that much time here, that breathe, emphasize, phrase, which is simply how good speakers speak. It's not a technique, it's just, I came up with it from watching him and other public speakers. They take a breath and they speak on the exhale, and they emphasize a word toward the end of a phrase, and they end the phrase and go on to the next phrase. Some do it more than others, but that helped me, and I began to really buy into that. And then I realized some more things, like you need to be expressive because that uses up the air, and I just began refining it. And if I wanted to go from here to there on my little journey, that may have gotten me maybe halfway, maybe less. And then I had to work through the psychological stuff. And the first thing there, I'll give you that story, and then I'll kind of end it. But I'm in the financial business. I'm an investment advisor.
Oh.
And so I have to say zero a lot. And I couldn't say zero. It was just, and so instead I would say, I would substitute words like all of us who started do. And my speech had improved a lot by that time. And I was in a conversation, I had to say zero, and I just decided, just on a whim, I am not going to substitute the word zero. I'm not going to say oh. I'm just going to say zero. And if I stutter, big deal. But I'm not going to substitute a word. Now, I had made a lot of improvement in my speech with, speaking in phrases, emphasizing words, being really expressive, breathing and all that. And I had gotten to the point pretty much by then, maybe not as much as now, that it was all automatic. So I didn't have to think about it. And that's one of the keys, not to think about my speech. And at that moment, I decided I am not going to say zero. And it was a conscious decision. And that I'm not going to say, oh, I'm going to say zero. And I said zero. And the world didn't end. I don't think I stuttered. And at that point, I decided from now on, I'm not substituting words. Now, it took me a long time to get to that point. That was probably a year in, maybe, to this. But that was another break. But the big turning point for me was working on my biggest challenge. And I literally went from challenge to challenge to challenge. And my biggest challenge, I felt, was if I could say my name, if I could introduce myself confidently, that would really be important for me. I didn't realize how important it was. And I spent months trying to work through saying my name. And I can go on and on with that. But that was the last thing that was really important. And after that, of course, I had to work through other things. But those were a few of the big moments.
That is something, it is amazing to hear how, people that stutter, especially a person that is severe, to come up with the fact that they speak better when they public speak. Now you started doing that before you started looking at math. You was thinking in your mind,
that was the first real aha moment, and just making that little bit of progress was so big for me, because I had tried a million things, tried a million therapies, tried a million this, tried a million that, and nothing ever worked for me that I felt would stick. And that was the start. But the most important thing I did really was having that foundation of a speaking strategy, let's say. And it's just a good speaker speak. I did not make this up. It's not a technique, because I do it all the time. And now I don't even think about it. Right now, I'm not thinking about it. I'm thinking of you and how I can convey my thought best. But that was so key. And that was the foundation for everything, really.
Now, when you actually decided, if I copy a broadcaster, I will be able to speak like them. Now, how long did it take when you first started doing that to where that you could actually speak? You have the technique down, breathe, emphasize, phrase, and it started affecting how you spoke. You started speaking without stuttering as much, and then pretty soon it's probably none. Now you're good at that. That's what I want to know. Go a little bit more.
That was a long time. I don't exactly remember how long. I don't remember if it was weeks or months, but I literally, the one key thing there is I made a decision, like right on the spot, that I was going to throw away how I spoke. Just throw away. And that's hard to do. I encourage, I talk to people all over the world, and that's probably the hardest thing for them to do, is to just throw away how they used to speak and commit to speaking like a professional speaker. And now, believe it or not, people pay me to do professional speaking. I actually just got an invitation to do another speech Just yesterday, I just got an email asking me to do one. I do professional speaking now, and they pay me, which I find to be the craziest thing in the world. But it probably took me months to really, get it, so I didn't have to think about it. It took me weeks to really work, get it going. But what I did basically was I just read some paragraphs, and then I would try and speak extemporaneously, like we're doing here, and see if I could, match how I was reading. I would read, speak, read, speak. But I already had a long head start because I was already committed to this phrasing thing.
Right.
I was already committed to that. And it's a big commitment. And it's the easiest part, frankly, of my journey, because it was just brute force practice. The other stuff, the psychological aspects, and working through speaking situations one after another, which is really the key. I mean, the breathe, emphasize, phrase stuff is really just the first step, and that isn't the key to real improvement. It's working through the speaking situations, but having that foundation, I don't think I would have gotten anywhere without that foundation. So
that is something. One more thought is, when you are a person who have a severe stutter, how did you get the willpower or the what it takes to step out of that comfort zone and say, I want to start my own business? A person who severely stutters would say, I want to go somewhere and zip it. I don't want anybody to even know I stuttered, but you were very ambitious. Go a little bit into that, and then I won't take much of your time. But
okay, so yes, I had avoided speaking like crazy, and that's why I compromised my career. I did work that I didn't think would make me talk much. So I became an accountant, CPA, master's in tax, so that I could sit in a room and be quiet. But there was talking with that. And then I became a financial writer, trying to hide even more. And then I joined this consulting firm to do writing for them. And that got me into talking more and more and more. And so my speech improved a lot. By the time I went off in my own business, I was not a severe stutterer at all. I had improved a lot. And again, I was able to do small talk. I was able to have conversations like this, but not on a serious level. No. I couldn't ask for $1 million, to open an account. I couldn't call people. I couldn't, introduce myself. I couldn't say my name, on and on like that. I could do the small talk stuff. So that was enough. And I was frankly desperate. I was desperate. And, you might think this is, wow, he got the courage. I was desperate. I had to save my business. And so I really don't want to, overstate that, gee, I all of a sudden was a strong person. Not at all. I was an underachiever. I was a person who avoided everything. I was just the opposite of what you're thinking, maybe. Yeah. But, and we'll close with this thought. The incredible part of what I experienced in this 2-year journey, and what I continue to experience, is that even though I was an underachiever, even though I was avoiding everything in my life, the process of improving my speech changed me. And I grew.
Right.
And maybe we can talk about this next week with our call. But the process of going through this, I changed. And so even if you don't think that you're ready to make a massive change in your life, like what I did,
right,
which was, again, it was really out of desperation. Even if you don't think you're ready, and you're probably right, but we're never ready, because in the process, we grow and we become that person. If we continue to push forward, we can become that person we want to be. So I hope that gave you a
Thank you.
good little
And
snapshot.
I'm looking forward to our next conversation,
Good.
because this is beginning to get good. Thank you. Thank you.
Always fun to talk with you. Let's do it next week.
Next week it is.
All right. See you then. Take care. Bye-bye.